A lonely army ranger only slept when the train wheels kept moving beneath him. But at a forgotten Pennsylvania station, one faint scratching sound made him step off. Inside a freezing freight car, he found a chained German shepherd, starving, injured, and still standing guard. The dog had belonged to a dead station master everyone called old and confused. Soon, one wounded man and one wounded dog would uncover the night trains a whole town was afraid to name. This is a story about silence, loyalty, and the courage to stay when leaving would be easier. Tell us where you're watching from, and if this story touches your heart, please like and subscribe to help us reach 1,000 subscribers and keep these stories alive. Walker Crowley had learned that silence was not peaceful. Silence was a room holding its breath. Silence was the second before glass burst inward, before dust filled the mouth, before a man discovered that the world could become white light and metal in a single heartbeat. People who had never heard that kind of silence called it quiet. Walker called it a warning, so he rode trains, not the sleek ones that cut between major cities with polished windows and passengers in expensive coats. Walker preferred the smaller routes, the winter lines that stitched through Pennsylvania's old towns like thread through a worn quilt. Coal country, iron bridges, depots with peeling paint, farmhouses standing back from the tracks like elderly witnesses too polite to speak. On trains, the sound came steady. Steel wheel against rail, joint, rhythm, joint, rhythm. Nothing sudden, nothing sharp, nothing that entered the body like a blade. The wheels did what doctors and pills and well-meaning conversations had failed to do. They gave his nervous system a pattern it could trust. The clatter beneath him was not gunfire. It was not a door slamming behind his shoulder. It was not a dropped plate in a crowded diner making his hand search for a rifle that had not been there in years. It was only the train. And if Walker kept moving, if he never stayed anywhere long enough for people to ask questions, he could almost convince himself that movement was the same thing as living. He sat alone near the back of the car, one broad shoulder angled toward the window, his canvas duffel resting against his boot. He was 49, tall enough that the old seat did not forgive his knees, built with the hard, spare strength of a man who had once carried too much weight over too many miles. His olive-drab combat shirt sat close against his torso beneath a faded canvas jacket. The camouflage sleeves were worn soft at the elbows, the dark horizontal bands at the biceps half hidden under the coat. His face, reflected faintly in the glass, looked more severe than he felt. Clean-shaven, angular jaw, strong chin, a small break in the line of his nose. Brown hair cut in a neat undercut, silver gathering at the temples like frost that had decided to stay. His right ear held a small black hearing device, almost invisible unless a person knew to look. Walker always knew when people looked. They looked at the ear, then the hands, then the boots. Then they decided whether he was dangerous, sad, or both. He closed his eyes and let the train carry him. Outside, snow drifted across the Pennsylvania hills in long, pale veils. The late afternoon light had the color of cold pewter. Barn roofs sagged beneath white weight. Bare trees leaned over frozen creeks. The world looked clean from a distance, which Walker had learned was one of winter's little jokes. Snow could cover anything. Rust, rot, tire tracks, blood. A town could look innocent if enough white fell on it. The conductor's voice crackled over the speaker, muffled and distorted. Walker caught only pieces. Black Walnut Grove. Brief stop. 5 minutes. He opened his eyes. The name meant nothing to him. That was one of its virtues. The train slowed, brakes whining low through the floor. Walker felt the vibration before he fully heard it, the old habit of a man who trusted bone conduction more than air. The rhythm changed. The train sighed. The car rocked once gently, as though settling into an old chair. Through the window, Black Walnut Grove appeared. It was hardly a station anymore, more like the memory of one. A narrow platform. A depot building with white paint flaking from the boards. A dark green roof carrying a soft ridge of snow. A sign with black letters half-eaten by time. Beyond it, a single diner glowed yellow through the winter dimness, its neon sign buzzing weakly. Birchwood Diner. No one stood waiting on the platform. No one waved. No one boarded. Walker watched the empty station and felt something in his chest loosen in a way he did not trust. Places like this had a habit of pretending they asked nothing from a man. Then they asked for everything. The train doors opened with a hiss that made his jaw tighten. He stood before he could think better of it, slinging the duffel over his shoulder. Coffee, he told himself. 5 minutes. Hot coffee, maybe something wrapped in wax paper. Then back on the train before anyone learned his name. The air hit him clean and bright. Snowflakes landed on his jacket sleeves and melted slowly into the camouflage fabric. The platform boards were slick beneath his boots. Somewhere far off, a crow called once and then seemed to regret it. Walker stepped down, adjusted his bag, and started toward the diner. Halfway along the platform, he stopped. It was not a sound exactly. Not at first. More a tremor through his right boot. Faint, uneven. Scrape, pause. Scrape, scrape, pause. He looked down. The vibration came through the platform boards, traveled along old bolts, moved up into the bones of his foot. Walker stood very still. His bad ear caught only the wind. His good ear caught the distant ticking of cooling metal from the train. But through the soles of his boots, something called from the edge of the rail yard. Scrape, pause, scrape. A weaker man might have kept walking and called it rats. A wiser man might have gone for coffee and minded his business. Walker turned toward the freight spur. An old boxcar sat beyond the main platform, half hidden beside a frozen switch stand. Its paint had once been red, maybe, but years of weather had faded it to the color of dried blood under dust. Snow had gathered along the roofline. One sliding door stood open by perhaps 6 inches, not enough for a person to pass through, but enough for darkness to breathe out. The passenger train behind him gave a warning hiss. 5 minutes, the conductor had said. Walker looked back at the warm windows of the train. For a moment, the whole shape of his life stood before him. Return to the car, sit down, let the wheels take him away. He was good at leaving. Leaving was clean. Leaving had no paperwork, no promises, no witnesses. A man could vanish from a place he had never entered. Then the scratching came again. This time, it stopped too soon. Walker lowered the duffel from his shoulder. "Damn it," he muttered. The words steamed white in front of his mouth and vanished. He crossed the track bed carefully, boots crunching through snow crust and gravel. Up close, the boxcar smelled of rust, old grain, damp wood, and something sour beneath it. Fear had a smell. So did hunger. He had learned both in places where neither should have existed. He put one gloved hand on the door and pulled. Metal complained loudly. Walker flinched, shoulders locking, breath catching hard in his throat. For half a second, the sound became something else, something tearing open in a white-hot blast. His fingers dug into the door's edge. No, Pennsylvania. Snow, rail yard, boxcar. He exhaled through his teeth and pulled again, slower this time. The gap widened. Inside, the dark held its ground. Walker took the small flashlight from his jacket pocket and clicked it on. The beam cut through dust and cold air, crawling over splintered boards, a rusted barrel, torn burlap, old straw frozen into dirty clumps. Then 2 eyes caught the light, one amber, one swollen, nearly shut. The dog stood near the far wall, thin enough that for one strange second Walker thought of a saint in an old painting. Too much bone, too much suffering, still standing as if the act itself were a prayer. A young German shepherd, yellow and black beneath filth. His dark saddle was dulled by dust, his honey-colored legs trembling from cold or exhaustion, or both. His ribs showed sharply. His muzzle was black, his ears too large for his starved body, one edge ragged as if torn and healed poorly. Around his neck, an old chain ran to a steel hook bolted into the wall. He did not bark. He did not lunge. He did not lower himself in surrender. He stood between Walker and the empty rear corner of the car, guarding nothing or guarding someone who was gone. Walker felt that detail land harder than the cold. "Easy," he said. His voice came out low, rough from disuse. He did not step closer. He did not put out a hand. Men who reached too quickly often got bitten, and often deserved it. Instead, he shifted his weight back on his heels and let the dog study him. The shepherd's nostrils flickered. His good eye tracked Walker's hands, then his shoulders, then the door behind him. His body shook, but his paws stayed planted. "You're not stupid," Walker said softly. "Good, that makes two of us, on a generous day." The dog's ears moved at the sound of his voice, not forward in trust, not back in terror, just listening. Walker crouched, slowly. His right knee complained with a hot little spark. He ignored it and reached into his duffel, pulling out a pair of compact pliers from the travel repair kit he carried for stubborn zippers, bent buckles, and the small betrayals of cheap equipment. The chain was old but thick, too thick for the pliers. The lock, however, was rusted ugly. He worked at it for several minutes. The dog watched every movement. Once, when the metal snapped softly under pressure, the shepherd jerked back so hard the chain choked him. Walker froze. "Easy, easy." He unzipped his jacket with one slow hand, shrugged out of it, and slid it across the floorboards toward the dog. The jacket stopped inches from the shepherd's paws. The dog sniffed it, uncertain. "It's not a trap," Walker said. "It's a jacket. Terrible fashion. Decent insulation." The smallest change moved through the animal. Not trust, not yet, but something less sharp. Walker returned to the lock. The pliers slipped. The rust gave him a few flakes, and nothing more. He could loosen the hook a fraction, enough to prove the chain had not become part of the wall, but not enough to free the dog. Behind him, the passenger train whistled. Once. Then, with cruel efficiency, it began to move. Walker turned his head. Through the open door, he saw the train sliding away from Black Walnut Grove, carrying warmth, motion, anonymity, and the bed-like rhythm that could have rocked him through another night. His duffel lay at his feet. His ticket was in his pocket. The shepherd stood in chains. Walker watched the last car disappear around the snowy bend. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he looked back at the dog. "Well," he said quietly, "that answers that." He climbed down from the boxcar and crossed to the diner. A bell over the door jangled when he entered, too sharp and bright. He winced. The inside of Birchwood Diner smelled of coffee, frying butter, old wood, and cinnamon. 3 men at the counter turned to look at him, then decided he looked like weather and went back to their mugs. Behind the counter stood a woman small enough to be underestimated by fools. She had white hair cut to her jaw, a blue apron tied over a cream sweater, and eyes that could probably remove paint if she stared long enough. "You missed your train," she said. "Noticed that." "You want coffee or directions to wherever poor judgment is taking you?" "I need bolt cutters." That made her look up properly. Her name, printed on a chipped badge pinned crookedly to her apron, was Vera. The badge had a little painted train engine above the letters. Walker would remember later that the engine looked cheerful, in a way no real machine ever had. Vera studied his face, his wet sleeves, the snow on his boots, the empty shape where his jacket should have been. "What did you find?" she asked. "Dog, chained in the old boxcar." The diner changed, not loudly, No one gasped. No one dropped a plate. But the air tightened around the counter, and every old man with a coffee mug suddenly became very interested in not turning around. Vera's hand went still on the pot. What kind of dog? German Shepherd. Young, starved, one eye swollen. The color left her face in a slow, terrible way. "Oh, Lord," she whispered. "That's Silas Bowman's dog." Walker did not know the name, but he knew the grief in hers. Vera grabbed a flashlight from under the counter and came around without taking off her apron. Outside, she moved faster than Walker expected, boots biting into snow, mouth set in a line so thin it looked stitched. At the boxcar door, she shone the light inside. The shepherd raised his head. Vera stopped, as if someone had struck her. "Sweet boy," she said, and the words cracked down the middle. "What did they do to you?" The dog did not come to her, but his ears softened, barely, enough that Walker saw it. "Silas Bowman was the stationmaster here," Vera said, her voice lower now. "Died 2 months ago. They said it was natural. Heart, stroke, whatever word keeps people from asking questions." "You didn't believe it?" "No." "Why?" She looked into the boxcar at the chain around the dog's neck. "Because Silas loved that animal more than he loved most people. And frankly, he had excellent judgment." Walker almost smiled. Almost. Vera pulled a phone from her apron pocket with fingers that had made too many pies and dialed. "Lyle, it's Vera. Bring the bolt cutters from your cruiser. No, I do not care if you're eating, because there's a dog chained in the freight car, and if you argue with me, I'll tell the whole diner what you did at the Christmas raffle in 2009. She hung up. "Deputy," she said to Walker. "Lyle Mercer, near retirement, which means he moves slow unless properly threatened." Mercer arrived 12 minutes later in a county cruiser that sounded like it had been negotiating with death for years. He was a thick-bodied man in a winter sheriff's jacket, gray hair cut short, face red from cold and irritation. He carried bolt cutters in one hand and a small black notebook in the other. "I should have let the railroad tear these old cars out years ago," he muttered. "You should have done a lot of things," Vera said. Mercer gave her a look, then saw the dog. Whatever complaint had been forming in him died. He stepped closer to the boxcar door, slower now. "That Bowman's shepherd?" Vera nodded once. Mercer looked at Walker. "You touch anything besides the lock?" "Jacket, pliers, didn't free him." "Good." Mercer opened his notebook, wrote with a stubby pencil, and sighed like the law itself had become tired. "Temporary animal welfare custody. I'll record the condition. We'll find who has legal claim if anyone does. Until then—" "He's coming with me," Walker said. Mercer studied him. "Name?" "Walker Crowley." "You local?" "No." "Of course not." Mercer looked as though this confirmed something disappointing about the universe. "You got a place for a dog tonight?" Walker looked toward the diner's glowing windows. Vera folded her arms. "He does now." Mercer snorted. "That's so?" "It is if you enjoy eating breakfast in this town." The deputy considered this and apparently respected the threat. They entered the boxcar together. Walker stayed low beside the dog, one hand holding the jacket open like a shield against the cold. Mercer set the bolt cutters around the chain near the wall. The shepherd tensed. Walker put 2 fingers against the floorboards and tapped once, lightly. Not a command. A rhythm? The dog's good eye shifted to him. "Steady," Walker said. The cutters bit down. The chain snapped. The sound cracked through the boxcar. Walker's chest seized, but he did not move. The shepherd flinched, hard enough that his legs nearly folded. Then the broken chain fell in a dead coil at his paws. No one reached for him. No one dragged him. For several breaths, the dog simply stood there, free and unsure what freedom required of him. Then he stepped forward. Out of the boxcar, onto the snow. His legs trembled under him, but he kept standing. The wind moved through his dirty coat. His swollen eye leaked, his ribs rose and fell too fast. Still, he lifted his head toward the dark rail line as if listening for a voice that would not come again. Walker picked up the loose end of the chain and tossed it back into the car. Beside the track, the old switch stand stood locked in ice, its handle angled between two directions. Walker looked at it, then at the dog. "Switch," he said. Vera turned. "What?" "His name." Walker's voice was quiet. "Switch." The shepherd looked at him, not lovingly, not gratefully, but he looked. And in that small, wounded acknowledgment, under the falling Pennsylvania snow, Walker felt the rail of his own life shift by an inch. Not enough to call it hope, but enough to keep him from walking away. Birchwood Diner had been built for men who worked with their hands. The counter was long and chipped at the edges, worn smooth by elbows, coffee cups, and the quiet weight of conversations no one had known would become history. Red vinyl stools stood along it, like soldiers past retirement. The floor was black and white tile, cracked in places, but scrubbed clean with a stubbornness that felt almost moral. Outside, black walnut groves slept beneath falling snow. Inside, the diner held its small kingdom of warmth. Coffee steamed in a glass pot. Butter hissed somewhere on a griddle. A wall clock shaped like a locomotive ticked too loudly over the pie case. Walker noticed that immediately and chose the table farthest from it. Switch moved beside him with uneven steps. The young German shepherd had not fought the leash Mercer loaned them. He did not pull toward food or shrink from the heat. He simply entered the room as though crossing into dangerous territory, his head low, his good eye moving from the counter to the booths, from the three old men pretending not to stare to the kitchen door swinging behind Vera Birchwood. Snow melted from Walker's boots and left dark marks on the tile. Vera saw them. "Wonderful," she said. "A man rescues a dog and murders my floor in the same evening." Walker looked down. "I can clean it." "You can sit before you fall over. Men your size always think gravity is a rumor until it collects its debt." She pointed to a booth near the back, not asking, not quite ordering. Walker obeyed, mostly because he had learned long ago that some women over 70 commanded rooms better than officers commanded platoons. Mercer remained near the entrance, stamping snow from his boots with exaggerated care. Vera looked at him over the coffee pot. "That performance is late by 40 years, Lyle." Deputy Lyle Mercer grunted, his red face half hidden behind the collar of his winter jacket. "You want my report, or you want to insult my footwear?" "I have range enough for both." One of the old men at the counter made the mistake of chuckling. Vera turned her eyes toward him. The chuckle died young. Walker slid into the booth. Switch did not follow fully under the table at first. He stood beside Walker's left knee, trembling, listening. The diner had too many little sounds: forks striking plates, the refrigerator hum, the wet slap of snow against the front window, the clock's bright ticking. Walker disliked the clock. Switch seemed to dislike everything equally. Vera brought a towel first, not food, not water. A towel. She placed it on the bench beside Walker without a word, then crouched with the stiff care of someone whose knees had signed their complaints years ago, and held out a second towel toward the dog. Switch stared at her hand. Vera stared back. "I have buried one husband, 2 ovens, and a Buick that had more personality than most men in this town," she said. "You do not scare me, sweetheart." Switch did not come closer. Walker reached for the towel. "He may not want—" "I know what he wants," Vera said quietly. "He wants the world to stop grabbing at him." That silenced Walker more effectively than a shout. Vera set the towel on the floor and pushed it gently toward the dog with 2 fingers. Switch sniffed it. After a long moment, he stepped onto it with his front paws, as if accepting a treaty he did not intend to sign twice. "Good," Vera murmured. The word was small. The room heard it anyway. She returned to the kitchen and came back with a dented metal bowl of warm water and a plate of chopped stew meat. The smell rose rich and heavy, beef and onions and salt. Switch's nostrils opened. Hunger moved through his body like a visible thing. His legs shook harder, but he did not eat. He lowered his head, sniffed once, then backed under the table and lay down with his chest facing the door. Walker watched him settle, not resting, positioning. His body made a narrow barricade between the booth and the entrance, one swollen eye half closed, one amber eye open and measuring. Every time the bell over the diner door stirred in the wind, the dog's ears twitched. Walker knew that kind of stillness. Men called it discipline when it wore a uniform. They called it damage when it did not. "He's guarding," Walker said. Mercer, who had come over with his notebook still in hand, looked down. "Guarding what?" Walker did not answer right away. The diner, perhaps. The woman who remembered him. The dead man who could no longer give orders. Or maybe the only rule the dog had left. Keep the door in sight. Vera poured coffee into a thick white mug and set it before Walker. "Drink." "I didn't order coffee." "You also didn't order a chained dog in a freight car. Yet here we are." Walker wrapped his hands around the mug because they needed something to do. The heat pressed into his palms. He did not drink at first. The smell was bitter, burnt, honest. Mercer sat across from him without being invited. His knees cracked under the table. The deputy opened his notebook, then closed it again, as if the official version of things had suddenly become too thin to hold the night. "Silas Bowman," Mercer said. 76, stationmaster when this place still had reason to call itself a station. Stayed on after the rail company cut most service, kept records, watched schedules, fed stray cats, argued with the weather. That dog followed him everywhere. "Family?" Walker asked. "A niece in Erie, maybe. They didn't talk much. No wife living, no kids." Mercer rubbed the bridge of his nose. "We found him in the station office 2 months ago, door locked, space heater on, papers everywhere." Vera, behind the counter, stopped wiping a clean plate. "Report said natural?" Walker asked. Mercer's jaw tightened. "Medical examiner wrote likely stroke or cardiac event. Old man, winter night, no sign of forced entry. That's where it landed." "Convenient." Mercer looked up sharply. Walker met his gaze without raising his voice. "Didn't say false, said convenient." The deputy's eyes held irritation first, then fatigue, then something less defended. "Everything in a dying town becomes convenient if enough people are tired," Mercer said. Vera put the plate down. For a moment the only sound was the locomotive clock ticking over the pies. Walker hated that clock more with every second. Vera came to the booth carrying a slice of apple pie she had not asked whether Walker wanted. She set it beside his coffee and stayed standing, one hand on the booth edge. "Silas came in here 3 nights before he died," she said. "Sat right where you're sitting, wouldn't take off his coat, wouldn't let Switch out of his sight." At the sound of his old master's name, the dog's head lifted. Not much. Enough? Vera saw it and looked away too quickly. "He said there were trains coming through after midnight," she continued. "No lights on the platform, no posted schedule. Freight cars that didn't match the manifests he could still access. He said the old chemical plant wasn't as dead as everybody liked to pretend." Mercer shifted. "Vera?" "No, don't you Vera me." Her voice did not rise. That made it worse. "You heard him too." "I heard an old man worried about rail traffic he wasn't paid to monitor anymore." He was a station master. Monitoring rail traffic was practically a religion to him. One of the old men at the counter whispered, "Silas did love a timetable." Vera looked over. "Thank you, Earl, for contributing the obvious." Earl returned to his coffee with dignity wounded, but not fatal. Walker finally took a drink. The coffee tasted like ash and iron and diner water. It steadied him anyway. "What chemical plant?" he asked. Vera pointed with her chin toward the dark beyond the windows. "North Ridge. Halwick Chemical. Once upon a time. Then other names. Then no name anyone could keep straight. Officially closed 5 years ago." "Officially?" Walker repeated. "That's the word people use when they're tired of asking what unofficially means." Mercer leaned back. "There's no plant running out there. No smoke, no workers, no permits for production." "Production isn't the only reason to keep a rail spur alive," Walker said. Mercer looked at him. Walker did not explain. He was not yet ready to become useful. Under the table, Switch shifted forward. His nose touched Walker's boot, then withdrew. Not affection. Contact. A question, maybe. Or a check. Walker lowered one hand beside the seat, palm loose, not reaching. After a hesitation, the dog's shoulder leaned lightly against his shin. It was no more than a few pounds of pressure. It changed the room. Walker stared at the steam rising from his mug. There were kinds of trust so small, most people crushed them by celebrating too soon. He did not move. He let the pressure remain what it was. Temporary, uncertain, real. Vera saw, but said nothing. That was the first thing Walker liked about her. Mercer cleared his throat. "I'll file the animal neglect report in the morning. For tonight, dog stays here. You too, if Vera's giving you the upstairs room." "She is?" Walker asked. Vera snorted. "He asks after tracking snow across my floor, frightening my customers, and discovering the town's saddest dog." "Yes, Mr. Crowley, you may sleep upstairs. Try not to bleed on the quilt. It's vintage." Walker almost told her he had money for a motel. Then he remembered seeing no motel. "Just one night," he said. Vera's eyes softened in a way she disguised by picking up his untouched fork. "Most people say that when they stop here." "And?" "Most are telling the truth." The line landed strangely. Walker looked toward the window. Outside, the passenger train was long gone. The tracks had already begun disappearing beneath fresh snow. He had missed trains before. He had slept in stations, bus shelters, one laundromat in Altoona, where the dryers had sounded enough like distant engines to carry him through 3 hours. Missing a train did not bother him. Being noticed did. Vera fetched an old blanket from the back room and laid it under the table near Switch. The dog did not use it until Walker nudged it with his boot. Then Switch stepped onto it, turned once, and lowered himself with a wince he tried to hide. Walker saw the pain. So did Vera. "Tomorrow," she said, "we call Miriam Kells. Vet, retired, technically, which in this town means she still works if properly bribed with pie." The dog's head rested on his paws. His eye remained on the door. By 9, the old men left one by one, each putting cash under his mug and pretending not to glance at the dog. Mercer finished his report and tore off a yellow copy for Vera because she demanded papers she could hold. Before leaving, he paused by Walker. "You were military," he said. It was not a question. Walker's fingers tightened around the mug. "Was?" he said. "Army?" Walker nodded once. "Thought so." Mercer glanced at Switch. "Silas said once that dog understood stations better than most people. Knew when a train was wrong before he did." Walker looked down at the shepherd. Switch had closed his swollen eye, but his good one opened when Mercer spoke. "Dogs notice patterns," Walker said. "So did Silas." Mercer put on his hat. "That's what bothers me." The bell over the door snapped bright when he left. Walker flinched before he could stop himself. It was a small movement, but Vera saw. She reached up without comment and caught the bell with a strip of cloth, muting it before the door swung shut again. No pity. Just adjustment. Walker looked at her. She shrugged. "That bell annoys me, too." It was a lie, and a kind one. Later, Vera led him up a narrow staircase behind the kitchen. The room above the diner was small, clean, and slanted under the roof. A brass bed stood against one wall. A dresser held a lamp with a yellow shade. The window looked out over the station, where snow gathered on the platform in pale layers. Switch refused to stay downstairs. He climbed the stairs slowly, ribs working beneath his coat, and stood in the doorway until Walker stepped aside. The dog entered, inspected the bed, the closet, the window, then chose the patch of floor between Walker and the door. Of course, Walker set his duffel on the dresser. "You don't have to do that," he told the dog. Switch lay down facing the hallway. Walker sat on the edge of the bed and removed the hearing device from his right ear. The world changed shape. The heater's hum softened. The wind became a pressure more than a sound. His own breathing grew too loud inside his skull. He should have been relieved. Instead, without the train beneath him, the room felt like an unplugged machine waiting to fail. He lay down fully clothed, boots off but within reach. The quilt smelled of cedar and laundry soap. Downstairs, pipes clicked. Somewhere outside, snow slid from a roof with a soft thump. His body jerked. Switch lifted his head. Walker shut his eyes. Nothing. The dog did not believe him. Neither did Walker. Time passed in uneven pieces. The clock downstairs bled faint ticks through the floorboards. The diner settled. Wind pressed against the window. The absence of rail rhythm grew larger and larger until it filled the room. In the dark, Walker thought of Silas Bowman sitting in the booth, coat still on, dog at his feet, trying to tell people that something moved through their town at night. An old man with papers, a dog who watched doors, a town that had learned the art of looking tired instead of afraid. Walker turned on his side. Switch stood suddenly. Not startled. Decided. The shepherd walked to the door and scratched once. Lightly. Walker opened his eyes. The dog scratched again. Not frantic, not pleading, deliberate. Walker sat up, every nerve awake. "You need out?" Switch looked at him, then at the door, then back. There was intelligence in the look, but not the theatrical kind people invented when they wanted animals to become messengers from heaven. It was simpler and more unsettling. The dog wanted him to follow. Walker put in his hearing device, laced his boots, and opened the door. The hallway was dark. Switch moved ahead slowly, sore but purposeful. Down the narrow stairs, through the diner where chairs had been turned upside down on tables, past the pie case shining faintly in moonlight. Walker unlocked the front door as quietly as he could. The muted bell made no sound. Cold entered at once. Outside, the snow had stopped falling. The station lay under a clean white hush, blue under the winter moon. Switch stepped onto the platform and turned toward the old depot office at the far end. Walker stood in the doorway of the diner, coat half-fastened. He could wake Vera. He should wake Vera. Instead, he watched the dog cross the platform and stop before the stationmaster's office. A strip of maintenance seal fluttered on the locked door. Switch did not bark. He did not paw wildly. He sat, then he lifted one front paw and placed it on the threshold. Walker felt the cold move through his shirt. Behind him, a stair creaked. Vera stood in the diner doorway, wearing a wool coat over her nightgown, her white hair loose around her face, a flashlight in one hand. "I knew that dog wasn't done," she said. Walker did not ask how long she had been awake. A few minutes later, Mercer's cruiser grumbled into the station lot, its headlights washing over the snow. The deputy stepped out half-dressed in uniform, notebook already in hand, irritation covering concern like a bad coat. "This better be good," he said. Switch kept his paw on the threshold. Vera's flashlight trembled once, then steadied. Walker looked at the sealed door, then at the dog, then at the dark windows of the station office, where a dead man's name still seemed to linger in the glass. "It might be," Walker said. And in the cold quiet of Black Walnut Grove, no one reached for the lock yet. They simply stood there with the dog, listening to all the things the town had not wanted to hear. Deputy Lyle Mercer did not cut the seal right away. He stood before the station master's office with his notebook open, flashlight tucked under one arm, pencil moving slowly across the page. Snow hissed softly over the platform roof. The maintenance strip across the door fluttered in the wind like a pale tongue that had forgotten how to warn anyone. Walker waited beside Vera. Switch sat at the threshold with one paw still resting against the bottom of the door. The dog had not barked once. That silence unnerved Walker more than noise would have. There were dogs that barked at shadows because fear had made the world too large. Switch did not waste sound. He held himself like a thing built to wait until waiting was no longer useful. Mercer cleared his throat. For the record, this is railroad maintenance closure tape, not sheriff's seal. No active crime scene designation. Vera folded her arms beneath her wool coat. You saying that for us or for your conscience? For a court if God gets bored and this town gives him paperwork? Walker glanced at the deputy. It was the first time Mercer had said anything that resembled humor. It was dry, unwilling, and not entirely healthy. Walker appreciated it. Mercer wrote one more line, then looked at him. Mr. Crowley, you stay where I can see you. You find anything, you don't pocket it, lick it, wave it around, or decide you're suddenly a detective. I wasn't planning to lick anything. Good, we're already ahead of some folks I've worked with. Vera gave a small sound that might have been a laugh if grief had allowed it more room. Mercer slid the bolt cutters around the strip and snapped it. The sound cracked through the platform. Walker's jaw clenched, but he held his ground. His hand found the old wooden railing beside the door, 2 fingers pressing against it, feeling the remaining vibration fade. Switch's head turned toward him, one sharp, brief check, then back to the door. Vera noticed. She noticed too much. Mercer unlocked the office with a ring of keys he claimed belonged to the county, but handled like borrowed gilt. The door stuck in its frame. He leaned his shoulder into it once. Wood groaned, old paint broke loose, and the office opened. Cold came out first, not outdoor cold. This was a sealed room cold, dry and stale, carrying paper dust, machine oil, tobacco ghost, and the faint sweetness of old varnish. Walker breathed through his mouth. The room had waited 2 months without deciding whether it was a room or a tomb. Mercer swept the flashlight across the wall. A metal desk sat near the window. A green banker's lamp leaned crookedly over it. File cabinets lined one side, their drawers labeled in precise block letters. A coat rack held a dark wool cap with a small rail insignia pinned above the brim. On the far wall, a large map of Pennsylvania rail lines had yellowed under glass. Thin red pencil marks ran across it in places, following branch lines through coal towns, river bends, and abandoned spurs. Vera stopped in the doorway. Walker sensed her not moving more than saw it. "You coming in?" Mercer asked. "In a minute," she said. Her voice had lost its diner edge. Without the apron, without coffee and sarcasm in her hands, she seemed smaller, though no less formidable. She looked at the cap on the rack as if it were a face turned away. Switch entered before anyone invited him. He moved differently in the office than he had in the diner. No frantic searching, no fear pull toward the exits. He lowered his head and began a slow circuit of the room, nose close to the floorboards. He checked beneath the desk, paused at the radiator, sniffed the window ledge. Then he came back toward the center and stood over a dark stain in the rug. Mercer saw it. "Coffee," he said too quickly. Vera looked at him. Mercer's mouth tightened. Probably coffee. No one corrected him. The room did not need help becoming worse. Switch moved on. At the row of cabinets, he stopped before the last one on the right. Unlike the others, it sat slightly forward, its back not flush to the wall. The dog lifted his damaged face and looked at Walker. Walker did not move at first. He had followed dogs before, in other countries and other lives. Dogs trained to find explosives, bodies, wires under dust. Men had trusted them because the alternative was trusting luck. But this was not a battlefield dog guiding a patrol. This was a starved animal in an abandoned station office, asking him to understand something without language. "Mercer?" Walker said. The deputy stepped closer. Switch scratched once at the bottom of the cabinet. Not wildly, just enough. Mercer crouched, grunting as his knees argued with him. He shone the flashlight behind the cabinet. "Well, what?" Vera asked from the doorway. "Either Bowman hit a mouse cathedral back here, or this thing moves." Walker came over and helped. Together, he and Mercer dragged the cabinet away from the wall. It scraped the floor with a long, ugly sound that made Walker's bad ear pulse. He forced himself to keep pulling until the cabinet shifted 2 feet. Behind it was a rectangular cut in the wall, covered by a piece of paneling that matched badly enough no one would notice unless a dog told them. Mercer looked at Walker. "Don't touch." "I know." The deputy used the end of his pencil to pry the panel loose. It fell forward with a dusty slap. Inside the wall cavity sat a waxed canvas envelope. Mercer stared at it for a long second. Then he put on gloves from his coat pocket. Walker liked him more for that. The envelope came out stiff with cold. Mercer laid it on the desk and opened it carefully. Inside were folded schedules, photocopied freight manifests, handwritten notes, and 3 photographs printed on cheap drugstore paper. Vera finally entered. The office seemed to make space for her sorrow. Mercer spread the papers with the solemnity of a man setting out bones. Walker stood back, arms folded, resisting the pull to analyze. He had trained himself to see pattern under pressure. Pattern meant survival, but pattern also meant obligation. If he saw too much, he would have to admit he was involved. He was not involved. He was a man who had missed a train. A man could miss a train and still leave on the next one. Vera picked up one paper, then put it down when her hand shook. "I don't know what I'm looking at." "Numbers," Mercer said. "Car IDs, maybe? Dates." Walker looked despite himself. The handwriting was old-school neat. Straight lines, no wasted loops. A stationmaster's hand. There were dates, times, car numbers, initials, and red pencil marks beside recurring entries. "Those aren't regular passenger notations," Walker said. Mercer looked at him. Walker wished he had stayed quiet. He pointed with 2 fingers, not touching the page. "The same block of cars appears late, after midnight, different dates, same direction, no corresponding public timetable. Whoever wrote this was comparing what passed through here with what was supposed to pass." Vera's face hardened. "Silas?" Switch had lain down near the desk. At the name, his ears lifted. It was the second time the dog had reacted that way, not to tone, to name. Vera saw it and looked away. The rehook came not as a bang, but as paper. A small folded note slipped from between 2 manifests and landed near Walker's boot. Mercer bent to pick it up, but Walker saw the top line first. "If they say I'm confused, ask Edith what I mailed her." Mercer froze. Vera whispered, "Edith." "Who's Edith?" Walker asked. Vera took the note from Mercer with both hands as if it had weight beyond paper. "Edith Pendleton used to run the library. Keeps every town record back to the flood, and I only say that because she probably corrected Noah's filing system." Mercer checked his watch. "It's almost 3 in the morning." Vera was already reaching for her phone. "Then she'll be awake. Edith considers sleep a clerical weakness." Edith Pendleton arrived 40 minutes later in a long gray coat, purple knit hat, and black boots polished despite the hour. She carried a leather satchel tucked beneath one arm and a small metal case in the other. Her face was narrow, her mouth thin, her eyes sharp behind round glasses that had slid halfway down her nose before she even entered the office. She took in the scene. Mercer, guilty. Vera, pale. Walker, unknown and too tall. Switch, watching from the floor. Papers spread across Silas Bowman's desk. "Someone is going to explain," she said, "why I was summoned to a station office at an hour when only raccoons and fools conduct business." Vera pointed at the note. Edith read it. Her expression did not change. That was the frightening part. She took off one glove finger by finger, then lifted the note closer to the banker's lamp. "Silas wrote this." "You're sure?" Mercer asked. Edith looked at him over her glasses. "Deputy Mercer, I cataloged that man's handwriting on 37 years of schedule corrections, coal transfer forms, property disputes, and letters to the editor regarding snow removal. Yes, I am sure." Mercer nodded once, accepting the wound. Edith opened her satchel and removed a folder tied with blue string. "He mailed me what he called supplemental historical rail material about 3 months ago. I placed it in pending review." "Pending?" Vera asked softly. Edith's hand paused. For the first time since entering, the old librarian looked old. "I thought he was becoming fixated," she said. He had been coming to the library with questions about land deeds, company names, maps of the old mine spurs. He seemed agitated. "I told myself the material could wait." No one spoke. The clock in the station office did not work, but the silence still ticked. Edith opened the folder. Inside were copies of land transfers, rail easements, county filings, and newspaper clippings. Her hands moved with practiced precision, aligning corners, sorting pages into stacks almost without looking. Walker watched a general take command of a battlefield made entirely of paper. "This," she said, tapping one document, "is the rear warehouse parcel behind the former Halewick chemical property. It changed ownership 7 years ago, then again 5 years ago. Then it was leased to Keystone Reclamation Services." Mercer frowned. Reclamation? Environmental cleanup? Nominally. Edith made the word sound like something found spoiled in the back of a refrigerator. They described themselves as a remediation logistics company. Storage, transfer, non-hazardous industrial material, equipment recovery. Very clean language. "What's dirty?" Walker asked. Edith gave him one measuring glance as if deciding whether he was literate enough to deserve explanation. "These railcar numbers Silas recorded," she said. "They correspond to late-night access along the old Halewick spur. But the filings I have show no scheduled freight movement requiring that frequency. More interestingly, 3 of these dates coincide with temporary road closures near the old Briar Cut Mine Road." Vera looked lost. "Meaning what?" "Meaning," Edith said, "something came by rail at night, then likely left by truck toward mineland no one has inspected properly in years." Mercer's face had gone very still. "That doesn't prove illegal dumping," he said. "No," Edith replied. "It proves someone built a very elegant place for suspicion to sit down." Walker almost smiled despite the hour. Switch rose then, slowly, and crossed to Edith. The old woman stiffened. "Do not shed on my coat," she said. Switch lowered his head and rested his muzzle on her boot. No one moved. Edith looked down at him through her glasses. Her face remained composed, but her mouth trembled once before she pressed it flat. "He brought this dog to the library," she said. "Silas, every Tuesday morning. The dog would sit beside the map cabinet and glare at anyone who misfolded a survey sheet." "Sounds useful," Walker said. "He had standards." Switch's tail did not wag. He simply stayed there, muzzle against Edith's boot, as though the room had finally produced another person who belonged to the same unfinished grief. Edith bent with difficulty and touched 2 fingers to the dog's head. "I am sorry," she said. It was unclear whether she meant it for Switch, Silas, or herself. Perhaps all apologies worth anything were crowded. They worked until dawn made the office windows gray. Mercer photographed the hidden compartment, the envelope, the papers, the note. Edith matched company names to old parcels. Vera sat in Silas's chair only once, then got up immediately and busied herself dusting a shelf that did not need dusting. Walker stood near the map and traced the rail lines with his eyes, seeing now how the old spurs ran like forgotten veins from the station to the North Ridge, then toward the abandoned coal country beyond. The evidence was not enough. Walker understood that first. No official agency would kick down doors over old notes, copied manifests, and an old woman's files. The papers suggested. They implied. They pointed. They did not yet prove. Still, they had weight. A town could ignore rumor. It could bury unease. It could call an old stationmaster confused and a dog inconvenient. Paper was harder to bury, especially when the dead man had written neatly. Mercer closed his notebook near sunrise. The sound was soft but decisive. "Camera was out the night Bowman died," he said. Vera turned. Mercer did not look at her. "I checked that at the time. Railroad maintenance said power surge. I didn't push." Edith's eyes sharpened. "And now?" "And now I feel stupid." "That is not a legal category." "No," Mercer said, "but it's a start." Walker looked at the deputy and saw the first crack in him. Not weakness, the kind of crack ice makes before a river remembers it is moving. Vera rubbed both hands over her face. "Silas died after sending all this?" "About 3 weeks after the folder arrived," Edith said. "And Switch disappeared after the funeral," Mercer added. "I thought somebody had taken him in." Vera's voice hardened. "Somebody did." The office held that truth without needing more words. Switch returned to Walker's side and sank down with visible exhaustion. His body had reached the end of whatever duty had carried him through the night. Walker lowered a hand and this time rested it lightly between the dog's shoulders. Switch did not flinch. There it was again, that dangerous small trust. Walker looked toward the platform where morning had begun to gather in silver light. Somewhere beyond the curve, another train would come eventually. He could still board one. He could still let Black Walnut Grove shrink behind glass until it became another name he forgot. He was not a cop, not a lawyer, not an environmental investigator, not anyone's station master. Vera must have sensed the movement in him because she said, "You don't owe this town anything, Mr. Crowley." Walker kept his hand on Switch's back. "That's the problem," he said. No one asked what he meant, maybe because they understood. A debt was easier to carry when someone handed it to you, harder when it simply appeared at your feet, shivering, half-starved, and loyal to a dead man who had tried to tell the truth. Switch shifted then, leaving Walker's hand, and crossed the room again. He did not go to the door. He went to Edith's chair, circled once, and lay beneath it, placing his head squarely on the toe of her polished black boot. Edith looked down. "Oh, absolutely not," she said, but the protest had no spine. Vera pressed her fingers to her mouth. Mercer looked away. Walker felt something settle in the room, not comfort exactly, more like permission to grieve and work at the same time. The dog had chosen his witnesses. Walker looked at the hidden compartment, the scattered papers, the red lines on the rail map, the dead man's cap on the rack. Then he looked at Switch, sleeping now beneath Edith's chair as if guarding another person who had waited too long to act. He understood, finally, that freeing the dog from the boxcar had only cut the first chain. The rest of them were still attached to the town. Walker missed the morning train on purpose. He told himself it was because of the dog. That was a clean reason, with 4 legs and an injured eye. It fit neatly in the mind. Switch needed a vet. Vera needed help moving Bowman's papers somewhere dry. Mercer needed someone to confirm what had been seen in the station office. Edith needed time to translate the dead man's records into something less like grief and more like evidence. All of that was true. It was not the whole truth. The whole truth waited outside Birchwood Diner in the clean winter light, where the tracks curved east beneath fresh snow and the morning train slid away without him. Walker stood on the platform with a mug of coffee in his hand, watching the last passenger car disappear between bare trees. The wheels made their steady music, steel on steel, a rhythm he could have slept inside. Switch stood beside his left leg, wrapped in an old brown blanket Vera had cut down and fastened with 2 safety pins. The dog looked ridiculous, like a wounded prince disguised as laundry. Vera had insisted on the blanket. Switch had endured it with the stiff dignity of a creature who understood humiliation was sometimes warmer than pride. "You can still catch the afternoon one," Vera said from the diner doorway. Walker did not turn. "I know." "You saying that because you plan to, or because you like facts arranged in simple rows?" He glanced back. Vera held 2 plates against her hip, apron already stained with flour. Her white hair was pinned badly, and a pencil sat behind one ear like a small weapon. "Both," Walker said. She snorted. "Dangerous answer means you're thinking." Switch leaned very lightly against Walker's shin. Not much, just enough for Walker to feel the tremor still living in the dog's body. The train vanished. The sound faded, and Black Walnut Grove remained. By 9, Doctor. Miriam Kells had arrived with a leather medical bag and the calm of a woman who had spent her life convincing frightened animals that the world would not end in the next 30 seconds. She was 68, round-faced, silver curls cut short beneath a wool hat, cheeks pink from the cold. She wore a quilted green coat and waterproof boots, practical as fence wire. Her hands were broad and scarred in the way of people who had been scratched, bitten, kicked, and still returned the next morning. She did not reach for Switch. That was the first thing Walker noticed. Miriam came into the back room of the diner, set her bag on a flour-dusted table, and sat on a stool several feet away from the dog. "Well," she said to Switch, "you look like you've had a poor opinion of people confirmed more than once." Switch watched her with his good eye. Miriam nodded, as if he had answered. Vera hovered by the door. "Can you help him?" "Vera, I have not yet touched him." "You've looked." "I also look at weather and men's haircuts. Doesn't mean I can fix them." Walker almost smiled. Miriam glanced up at him. "You're Walker Crowley." "Yes." "You found him?" "Yes." "You keeping him?" The question came without sentiment. That made it harder to dodge. "For now," Walker said. Miriam's eyes stayed on him a moment longer. Animals dislike temporary arrangements almost as much as people pretend to. She turned back to Switch and opened a small tin. The smell of soft liver treats filled the room. Switch's nose twitched. His body betrayed him before his pride could object. Miriam placed one treat on the floor halfway between them and withdrew her hand. Switch did not move. "Good," she said. "Suspicion is not a disease." She waited. After nearly a minute, Switch stretched his neck forward, took the treat with the delicacy of a thief lifting a coin, then retreated behind Walker's boots to chew. Miriam examined him in pieces. First the eye from a distance with a small light, then the ribs with 2 fingers when Switch allowed it, then the raw mark around his neck. She spoke before every touch. "Shoulder." "Ear." "Easy now, I know. I would not like me either." Switch growled once, low and tired, when she looked near the torn edge of his right ear. Walker's hand moved toward the dog automatically, then stopped. He did not want to clamp control onto an animal who had just left a chain. Miriam saw the restraint and nodded slightly. "Let him tell us the truth," she said. So they did. The truth was bad, but not hopeless. Severe underfeeding, soft tissue bruising near the left eye, irritation from cold exposure, collar abrasion old enough to have scarred at the edges. No broken legs, no obvious internal injury, teeth worn less than expected, which told Miriam he was young. 2.5, maybe 3, she said. Young enough to heal. Old enough to remember. Vera's mouth pressed thin. Miriam packed ointment and drops for the eye, then looked at Walker. He'll need small meals. Warm. No garbage kibble if you can help it. His stomach won't forgive enthusiasm. I know something about that, Vera said. Most men who eat here don't. Miriam ignored her. And don't mistake his reactions for magic. Walker looked at her. Silas walked that dog all over the rail yard, Miriam said. Past the freight spur, past the old Halwick access road, out by the North Ridge. If this dog reacts to places, it may be scent memory, oil, brake dust, chemical residue, men's gloves, Silas's boots. That doesn't make him a miracle. It makes him a witness with a nose. Switch had settled against the wall, watching them through the veil of his injured eye. A witness with a nose. Walker liked that better than hero, better than weapon. By noon, the diner had become a war room no one would admit to naming. Edith arrived with boxes from her house stacked in the back of Mercer's cruiser. She objected to the term war room immediately, though no one had said it aloud. This is a temporary archival review area, she declared, placing a folder on a table. If anyone sets coffee near these documents, I will commit a small but memorable crime. Vera held up both hands. The documents are safe. The pie is not. Mercer spread county maps across 2 pushed-together tables. His uniform jacket hung over a chair. Without it, he seemed less like the law and more like a tired man trying to remember where he left his courage. Walker worked at the end of the table, copying car numbers from Bowman's notes into a small notebook. His handwriting was blocky, efficient, without flourishes. Dates, times, direction, weather, notes. The old habits returned easily. Observe, record, compare, do not assume. Outside the windows, winter made the town look gentler than it was. Inside, Edith's pencil moved like a sewing needle, stitching together the skin of a wound. Briar Cut, she said. Old Mine Road. Closed officially in 1989 after a collapse. Mercer grunted. Teenagers used to drink out there. Young people have always mistaken structural instability for romance, Edith said. Vera slid a plate of toast toward Walker without asking. Eat. I'm working. Then work with blood sugar. Switch lifted his head at the toast. No, Vera told him. You get boiled chicken later, and you will be grateful because I am emotionally fragile and need praise. Switch blinked. Walker gave him the smallest piece of crust when Vera turned away. Switch took it carefully. It was the first unlawful act they committed together. By late afternoon, they had a map pinned to the back wall of the diner near the coat hooks. Red pencil for Bowman's recorded cars. Blue for property transfers. Black for old mine roads. Green for sightings Vera remembered from conversations no one had known mattered at the time. The pattern did not prove anything, but it had begun to look like a pattern. That was how trouble usually introduced itself, not as certainty, but as an arrangement too organized to be coincidence. After midnight, Walker saw the first train. He watched from the shadow of an old feed shed beside the rail yard, camera braced against the wood. Mercer had told him not to get close. Vera had told him not to be stupid, which covered more ground. Switch stood beside Walker, leash loose, breath faint in the cold. The town looked different after dark. Snow reflected moonlight until the track seemed silvered, almost sacred. The depot roof glowed white. The diner's neon sign was off. Houses on the hill showed only a few lit windows, dim yellow squares belonging to people who slept badly or not at all. Then the rails began to hum. Walker felt it through his boots before the sound reached his ears. Switch felt it too. The dog stiffened, not in fear, but recognition. His nose lifted. The injured eye narrowed against the wind. No whistle, no platform lights. A low shape moved out of the dark. Freight cars, unmarked except for reporting numbers, their sides dull gray beneath streaks of road grime. The engine ran with its lights cut low, moving along the spur like something ashamed of its own weight. Walker raised the camera. Click. The sound was tiny. Still, it made his shoulders knot. Switch touched his muzzle to Walker's gloved hand. Not dramatic, not soft. A brief pressure, there and gone. Walker lowered his breathing. The train rolled past the sleeping station and did not stop at the depot. It continued north toward the old Hallowick property, where the official plant had been closed for 5 years, and the warehouse behind it was apparently still alive in the dark. Later, from a hill road, Mercer said the county no longer maintained, they saw small trucks leave the warehouse access. No company logo, no headlights until they reached the main road. They turned toward the black line of trees leading to Briarcut. Walker photographed what he could. Switch sneezed twice and pulled back from the roadside ditch, nose wrinkling. Walker looked down. Not magic. Memory. Warning. They returned before dawn with frozen hands, blurred photos, and enough suspicion to make sleep impossible. The next evening, Vera called a meeting in the church basement. Not an official meeting. Official meetings required agendas, posted notices, microphones, and the kind of language that let people hide inside procedure. Vera wanted chairs in a circle, bad coffee, and no escape except honesty. St. Bartholomew's Church sat above town on a low rise, white steeple pointed into the winter sky like an old finger accusing heaven of neglect. The basement smelled of dust, radiator heat, and decades of potluck casseroles. Folding chairs had been arranged beneath fluorescent lights that hummed in a way that set Walker's teeth on edge. Only 11 people came. That seemed to disappoint Vera and relieve Mercer at the same time. They were mostly older residents, widows in heavy coats, retired railmen, a former mechanic, 2 women from the church fund, and a thin man with a cough who sat near the back as if prepared to flee his own name. Jonah Rusk. Walker did not know him yet, but the room seemed to. Jonah was 63 and looked older in the light. His work jacket hung from him as if he had shrunk inside it. His hair was a dull gray blonde, thin over the scalp. His hands rested on his knees, knuckles stained in old ways, soap no longer solved. When he coughed, he turned his face away with the practiced shame of a man whose body had become an interruption. Vera stood at the front holding no notes. "We know enough to ask questions," she said. "We do not yet know enough to survive pretending we don't." No one liked that. A woman named Marlene Pike crossed her arms. "Questions don't pay heat bills." "No," Vera said. "Neither does poison." Marlene looked away. Mercer explained the reports, carefully avoiding accusations. Edith laid out copies of maps and company filings on a long table. Miriam, who had come despite insisting she disliked gatherings and most chairs, described the symptoms she had seen in livestock years earlier near the North Ridge. Stillborn calves, eye irritation, unexplained burns on paws after wet weather. She made no claim she could not support. Walker stood behind Switch near the door. He had not planned to speak. The room's air felt used up. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Every cough, chair scrape, and clearing throat landed wrong in his ears. He focused on Switch's body against his leg and the old stone wall behind him. At first, people denied gently. That was the worst kind. No one shouted. No one called Bowman a liar outright. They said maybe Silas had been tired. Maybe the company was storing scrap. Maybe old mines smelled bad on their own. Maybe sickness came with age. Maybe water changed taste because pipes were old. Maybe. A town could build a coffin out of maybes and lie down in it politely. Then Jonah Rusk raised a hand. It trembled. The room went still before he spoke. "I signed one," Jonah said. Vera turned slowly. Signed what? A warehouse condition form. He coughed into his fist, then continued. Keystone needed somebody who'd worked Halwick to say the rear storage building was suitable for equipment. Old drums, sealed containers, that kind of thing. They said non-hazardous. They paid me $200. No one moved. Jonah's face had gone gray. I didn't ask enough, Marlene whispered. Jonah. He looked at her, eyes wet but not crying. No, let me get it said before I get scared again. That was the moment the chapter turned inside Walker. Not because Jonah confessed something enormous, because he confessed something small enough to be believable, small enough to ruin him anyway. After Jonah, others spoke in pieces. A woman said her well water tasted metallic after heavy rain. A retired mechanic admitted he had seen trucks on the mine road after midnight, but told himself it was county work. Marlene said the church roof had been repaired with a donation routed through a community fund tied to Keystone. Another man muttered that his cousin leased access land and would lose the payments if trouble started. No one sounded evil. That made Walker angrier. It would have been easier if they had sounded evil. He felt heat rise beneath his ribs. The old, efficient anger, the kind that wanted names, targets, doors kicked in. He looked around the basement at the bent shoulders, the fixed eyes, the hands gripping paper cups, and for one brutal second he wanted to call them cowards. All of them. For hearing and not speaking. For letting an old man die with his records. For letting a dog rot in a boxcar because truth cost too much in winter. A door at the back of the basement slammed open when the wind caught it. The sound struck Walker sideways. White flashed behind his eyes. His hearing device screamed feedback for half a second. The room tilted. His hand shot toward a weapon that was not there. The fluorescent lights stretched into hard lines. Voices blurred. The basement became too small, too bright, too loud. Then weight pressed against his thigh. Switch. The dog did not bark, did not leap, did not face the room like a guard. He leaned, hard enough to anchor. His shoulder drove into Walker's leg, warm and shaking. His head pressed against Walker's hand. Walker's fingers closed in the fur at the back of the dog's neck, not gripping, just finding something alive. Breathe. The word did not come from anyone. It came from pressure, from bone against bone, from a half-starved dog who had been afraid of every hand, but still knew how to hold a man in the present. Walker drew air in. Once. Again. The room returned. Not kindly, but it returned. Everyone was looking at him. He hated that. Switch stayed pressed against him. Walker looked at Jonah Rusk, then at Marlene, then at the old mechanic with his cap in both hands. The anger in him had not vanished. It had changed shape. He had heard and not spoken to. Not about trains or chemicals. About himself. He had told people he traveled because he liked rail lines, because sleep came easier on the move, because America looked better from a window. All of that was true in the way a locked door was true. It did not say what stood behind it. He moved because staying made room for memory. He moved because people could ask him to become someone. He moved because leaving before dawn felt like control. Walker took his hand from Switch's neck, but left his fingers against the dog's fur. "I get being afraid," he said. His voice came out rougher than he wanted. No one interrupted. "I get telling yourself survival is the same as doing right. Sometimes it is. Sometimes it's the only thing a person can manage." He looked at the maps on the table. But if Bowman was right, this isn't just about one dead man, or one dog, or old land nobody wants. This is about what happens when a town decides breathing dirty air is better than having no air at all. Marlene's eyes filled. Walker looked away before pity could make him cruel. "You want them exposed," Mercer said quietly. Walker shook his head. "Not enough." Edith's gaze sharpened. Walker looked at the people in the folding chairs, these remnants of a town that had been asked to choose between dignity and heat, between truth and groceries, between clean water and not losing the last roof over their heads. "If all we offer is punishment," he said, "they'll cling to the lie, because the lie pays bills." Vera's face changed first, not into hope. Vera did not trust hope unless it came with a receipt, but her eyes narrowed, alert. "So what do we offer?" she asked. Walker looked toward the basement window where snow had piled along the outside sill, bright even in the dark. He thought of the station, the old map, the diner, the rail line, Silas Bowman's cap hanging in a dead office, Switch sitting on the platform with one paw on the threshold. "I don't know yet," he said. It was not the answer a hero would give. It was the only honest one. Edith picked up one of the old rail maps and smoothed it with her palm. "Then perhaps we begin," she said, "by remembering what this town was before it learned to accept hush money." No one laughed, no one cheered, but no one left either. Switch finally eased his weight off Walker's leg and sat down beside him, still touching his boot. Walker looked at the circle of tired faces under the basement lights and understood that the work had shifted. Evidence would matter. Law would matter. Maps, samples, records, signatures, all of it would matter. But before any agency could save Black Walnut Grove, the town would have to decide it was worth saving without the money that had been poisoning it. Outside, the snow kept falling, soft as forgiveness and just as difficult to trust. Walker had missed one train. For the first time, he wondered what kind of man he might become if he missed another. Edith Pendleton did not believe in inspiration. She believed in indexes, cross-references, acid-free folders, and the moral superiority of a properly sharpened pencil. So when everyone sat in Birchwood Diner the morning after the church basement meeting, looking as if truth had robbed them of sleep and then charged interest, Edith did not offer comfort. She arrived with 3 cardboard archive boxes, a thermos of tea she refused to share because communal beverages are how civilizations decline, and a plan no one had asked for yet. Vera was behind the counter burning toast by accident and pretending it was deliberate. Mercer sat near the window, his county radio turned low, reading the same page of notes for the 5th time without absorbing it. Miriam Kells was at the end of the counter mixing warm rice and boiled chicken into a small meal for Switch, who waited beneath Walker's table with the fragile patience of an animal, learning that food might come twice in one day. Walker stood near the back wall, studying the map they had built. Rail lines, mine roads, land parcels, night train sightings, old company names folded over newer ones like snakes shedding skins. The map did not comfort him. Maps had never comforted him. A map was a promise the terrain would behave, and terrain rarely did. Edith cleared her throat. No one reacted quickly enough. She cleared it again, sharper. Vera looked over. "If you're choking, do it near the sink." "I am attempting to address the room." "Then address it. We're not Congress." Edith opened the first archive box and removed a bundle of photographs tied with cotton string. "Last night proved something unpleasant." "Only one thing," Mercer muttered. "It proved," Edith continued, ignoring him, "that accusation alone will fail." Walker turned from the map. Edith placed the photographs on the table one by one. Black Walnut Grove in other winters. The station crowded with men in wool coats, women with suitcases. Coal cars lined along the spur. A marching band on the platform sometime in the 50s, their brass instruments shining like captured suns. Apple crates stacked under a sign advertising cider shipments east. Soldiers stepping off a train in a grainy photo dated 1946, their faces blurred but their posture unmistakable. Men trying to remember how to come home. Vera's burned toast smell faded beneath memory. This town was not always a place people endured, Edith said. It was a place people arrived. No one made a joke. Even Vera let the line stand. Edith removed a rail timetable from 1938, unfolded it with priestly care, and weighted the corners with coffee mugs after first glaring at Vera until she replaced them with clean saucers. Coal came through here. Apples, mail, machinery, workers, brides, caskets, men going to war, men returning from war. People did not come here because it was charming. They came because it mattered. Walker looked at one of the photographs. A younger station platform, thick with steam, a dog-shaped blur near the luggage carts. Maybe not a German shepherd, maybe not anything important. Still, his eyes stayed there. Vera leaned both hands on the counter. "Edith, if this is your way of saying we should sell postcards, I need more coffee before despair." Edith looked offended on behalf of postcards everywhere. "I am saying that if we walk into county council with only contamination, hidden trains, and shame, half this town will oppose us before Keystone even opens its briefcase." Mercer's jaw shifted. "Because they'll lose money." "Because they believe losing dirty money means losing the last money," Edith said. "There is a difference. One is greed. The other is terror." Miriam set the bowl down for Switch. "Okay," she said softly. Switch did not move. Walker realized everyone had gone quiet. The dog's ears twitched. He stared at the bowl, body taut with hunger, waiting for permission from rules none of them fully knew. Walker crouched beside him. "Easy," he said. Switch glanced at him. "Okay," Walker repeated. The dog lowered his head, then stopped again, uncertain. Walker touched 2 fingers lightly to the floor beside the bowl. "Okay, Switch." This time the shepherd ate, not greedily, not yet. He took the food in hard little bites, as if expecting it to be taken back, but he ate from a bowl in a warm room while people waited respectfully around him. Vera looked away first. "Fine," she said gruffly. "The dog gets breakfast and the town gets a future. Continue." Edith drew herself taller. "The station," she said. "A limited historical designation application. Not grand, not expensive. A public memory room, rail maps, mining history, Bowman's records, if Mercer ever releases them from the iron fist of his notebook." "They're potential evidence," Mercer said. "Copies, Deputy. Civilization invented them for a reason." Walker studied the station photographs. "A museum won't replace hush money." "No," Edith said, "but a restoration plan might help people stop believing hush money is the only roof left." The idea began as something laughable. Then, annoyingly, it began to stand. Vera could reopen the diner counter on weekends for train enthusiasts and winter travelers. Edith could curate a small exhibit on rail and mining history. Mercer knew which county forums could request a formal environmental review. Miriam could document animal and livestock complaints near the North Ridge without overstating them. Walker could help with the station repairs, photograph the rail spur, and map the places Switch remembered from Bowman's old routes. "I'm not a contractor," Walker said. Vera looked at his shoulders. "You'll manage a hammer." "That's not a credential." "In this town, it's practically a graduate degree." For the first time since arriving, Walker laughed. It came out rough and surprised, like a rusty hinge opening in a house no one had entered for years. The sound startled even Switch, who lifted his head from the bowl with rice on his nose. Vera pointed at the dog. "See? Even he thinks it was unnatural." Walker wiped his face with one hand, embarrassed by the smallness of the joy and the size of its echo. That became the day's work. Not saving the town. No one was foolish enough to claim that. They began instead with a table full of partial things: partial maps, partial evidence, partial hope. Edith drew up a list of what would be needed for historical designation. Mercer called a contact at the county office and requested the proper procedure for submitting concerns about possible illegal waste transfer. He used the phrase "possible" so many times, Walker began to hate it, though he understood why it mattered. Miriam took Walker and Switch out beyond the North Ridge in the afternoon. The sky was bright, painfully blue. Snow lay across the fields in sheets so clean it seemed rude to suspect the earth beneath it. Miriam carried glass jars, labels, and a little folding trowel. She made Walker write the time, temperature, location, and weather conditions in his notebook. "These samples won't stand up as legal proof," she said. "You mentioned that. I will keep mentioning it until everyone stops wanting miracles in jars." They moved along a frozen ditch near the old service road. Switch walked carefully, stronger than the day before, but still thin under Vera's cut-down blanket. At one bend in the ditch, he stopped, sneezed, and backed away, ears flattening. His nose wrinkled. Walker crouched. The ice there was cloudy, with a faint yellow-gray seam under the surface. Miriam did not touch it with her bare hands. She marked the spot, collected a small sample, and sealed the jar. "Could be runoff from old mine waste," she said. "Could be road salt contamination. Could be nothing we can prove." "But not nothing," Walker said. Miriam looked at Switch, who had moved behind Walker's leg and refused to face the ditch again. "No," she said. "Not nothing." They spent the next 2 days collecting what they could without trespassing. Photographs from public roads, notes from residents willing to speak quietly, old records Edith produced from boxes no one else could lift without apologizing to their spine. The plan took shape, not like a banner, but like stitching. Small, ugly in places, stronger than it looked. Then Calder Voss came to the diner. He arrived just before closing, when snow had begun to fall again, and the day's last light turned the windows pewter gray. The bell over the door had been muted with Vera's cloth strip, so he entered almost silently. Walker noticed him before the others did. Not because Calder looked dangerous, because he looked too clean. He was in his mid-50s, tall and narrow, with a charcoal wool overcoat that had never been asked to split firewood or change a tire in slush. His scarf was pale gray cashmere, his gloves black leather, his shoes polished absurdly well for a town where salt and mud had legal residency. His hair, brown shot through with silver, lay perfectly parted. His smile arrived at the correct time and nowhere near his eyes. "Mrs. Birchwood," he said, removing his gloves finger by finger. "I hope I'm not intruding." Vera looked at him over the register. People who hope that usually check before they come in. His smile deepened by one professional degree. Calder Voss, Keystone Reclamation Services. The room cooled, not physically. Worse? Mercer, sitting near the pie case, closed his notebook. Edith sat very still. Miriam's hand rested on her medical bag. Switch rose from beneath Walker's table without a sound. Calder noticed the dog. For a fraction of a second, his eyes sharpened. Then they softened into concern. "I heard about the animal," he said. "Terrible thing. This town has suffered enough neglect." Walker did not move. Switch stood beside him, head low. Vera wiped her hands on her apron. "You want coffee?" "Thank you, no." Calder placed a cream-colored envelope on the counter. "I came because Keystone remains committed to Black Walnut Grove's stability. We understand there has been renewed interest in the station property and local heritage. Our community foundation would be honored to support preservation efforts." Edith's voice cut across the room. "How generous. Does the foundation also preserve manifests?" Calder turned toward her. "Miss Pendleton, I have heard your name often." "How unfortunate for you." His smile endured. "We believe history should unite communities, not divide them with speculation." Mercer stood. "You here in an official capacity, Mr. Voss?" "I am here as a neighbor." Vera laughed once. It had no humor in it. "Keystone's office is in Harrisburg." "A regional neighbor, then." Walker looked at the envelope. Vera did too. The diner became very quiet. He saw the battle in her face before she moved. Not fear of Calder. Something worse. Recognition. The envelope was not the first help Keystone had offered this town. Maybe not the first help Vera had taken. Her fingers hovered over it. For a second, Walker thought she might pick it up. Not because she wanted dirty money, because her roof leaked, because the stove was old, because Winter did not care about moral clarity, because good people could be cornered with repair bills more effectively than with guns. Vera touched the envelope. Then she slid it back across the counter toward Calder. "My roof leaks," she said. Calder inclined his head sympathetically. "That is precisely why it can leak honestly." The words landed so softly that no one breathed over them. Vera straightened. "And if this place falls down, Mr. Voss, it will fall down without being held up by whatever you are trying to buy." Calder's expression did not change much. Only his eyes cooled. "You may wish to consider," he said, "how many people in this community rely on partnerships they cannot afford to lose." "There it is," Edith murmured. "The charity has teeth." Calder put his gloves back on. At the door, he turned toward Walker. "Mr. Crowley, is it?" Walker did not ask how he knew. Calder's gaze flicked to the hearing device in Walker's ear, then to Switch. Some towns are fragile. Outsiders sometimes mistake fragility for corruption. Walker stood slowly. Switch stepped with him. "No," Walker said. "I usually mistake corruption for corruption." For the first time, Calder's smile failed completely. Then he left, closing the door with perfect restraint. That night, someone broke the station lock. Switch smelled smoke before anyone else saw it. Walker was sleeping in the upstairs room when the dog surged to his feet. Not a bark, not a scratch. A violent, silent urgency, paws striking the floorboards, body slamming once against the door. Walker woke hard, breath catching, hand searching empty air. Smoke reached him then. Thin, bitter, wrong. He grabbed his boots, shoved his feet into them without socks, and ran. Switch was already at the bottom of the stairs, scraping at the diner's back door. Vera appeared from her room in a robe and coat, hair loose, face white. "Station," Walker said. They crossed the platform through falling snow. The office window glowed orange at the bottom edge. Mercer's cruiser skidded into the lot 30 seconds after them, siren off, but lights flashing red against the snow. He came out carrying an extinguisher and swearing with the focus of prayer. The station door hung open. Inside, smoke crawled along the ceiling. The fire had not taken the walls yet. It had been set low, near the desk, where a stack of copied records had been piled. Paper burned with quick, hungry brightness. Walker moved before thought could argue. Mercer hit the flames with the extinguisher, white chemical blasting across the desk and floor. Vera coughed in the doorway, refusing to back up. Walker grabbed a wool coat from the rack and smothered a burning folder near the cabinet. Switch vanished under the smoke. "Switch!" Walker shouted. The dog emerged a moment later, dragging something in his mouth, a scorched file tied with blue string, edges glowing in tiny red teeth of fire. Walker dropped to one knee, took it, and slapped the embers out with his gloved hands. Switch coughed, then sneezed violently, eyes watering. Walker pulled him close by the collar and shoved his own face into the dog's neck, checking breath, heat, life. "You idiot," he whispered. Switch leaned into him, trembling. Vera stood in the ruined doorway, one hand over her mouth. Mercer lowered the extinguisher. The office was not destroyed. That almost made it worse. Whoever had done it had not come to burn a building. They had come to burn memory. Edith arrived minutes later in Mercer's second call, wearing her gray coat over pajamas and an expression so cold the remaining smoke seemed to avoid her. She saw the blackened desk, the wet chemical foam, the burned edges of Bowman's copies, and said nothing for a long time. Then she walked to the scorched file Switch had pulled free. She opened it with careful fingers. The top pages were ruined. Beneath them, partly smoked but readable, was an old photograph of the station crowded with passengers in winter. Silas Bowman, much younger, stood near the platform edge with one hand raised to a departing train. Edith pressed the photo flat on the desk. Vera whispered, "They tried to burn him twice?" Walker looked around the room, the dead man's cap still hanging on the rack, the map streaked with smoke, Switch coughing beside his leg, Mercer already photographing the damage with hands that shook from anger. Outside, lights came on in houses across the town, one by one. People were waking, drawn not by rumor, not by paperwork, not by a meeting they could pretend to forget, by smoke, by proof that someone feared what the dead had left behind, by the smell of burned paper drifting over clean snow. Walker stood in the station office as dawn's first gray began to touch the windows, and understood that the town's silence had ended, not with a shout, but with ash in its hair. The morning of the county council meeting was too beautiful for what it was about. Sunlight spilled over the parking lot in hard winter brightness, striking windshields, roof lines, and the crusted snowbanks pushed up by the plows. The courthouse stood on a low hill outside the county seat, built of pale stone with narrow windows and a flag snapping in the clean air. Everything looked washed, innocent almost. Walker did not trust it. Snow had a talent for making rot look holy. He stood beside Vera's old pickup, one hand resting on Switch's leather leash, the other pressed lightly against the black hearing device in his right ear. The cold sharpened every sound. Boots on pavement, doors shutting, a distant engine starting, the scrape of a shovel somewhere behind the building. Each noise arrived with a bright edge. Switch stood at his left leg, stronger than he had been days ago, but still too thin beneath his yellow and black coat. Miriam had wrapped the dog's leash around a sturdy leather harness, not a service vest, not a costume, just something solid enough for Walker's hand to find if the room got too loud. A small tag on the harness read, "Switch," in plain letters. "He doesn't need a sign," Miriam had said earlier, tightening the strap with careful fingers. "Anyone with sense will know he's working." "County buildings are not famous for sense," Edith had replied. Now Edith marched across the parking lot ahead of them, small and severe beneath her gray coat, two labeled document boxes stacked in a folding cart behind her. The cart's wheels rattled over ice, and Edith looked personally offended by every bump. Vera followed with a tray of coffee and wrapped slices of apple cake, because Vera apparently believed moral confrontation required refreshments. Mercer arrived in uniform, face red from cold, hat pulled low, notebook already in hand. He looked like a man walking toward an appointment with his own failure. "You good?" he asked Walker. Walker looked at the courthouse doors. "No," Mercer nodded. "Me neither." It was the most useful thing anyone had said all morning. Inside, the council chamber smelled of old carpet, floor polish, overheated radiators, and wet wool. Folding chairs had been set in rows. A long raised table faced the room where 5 council members sorted papers and avoided eye contact with anyone carrying a box of evidence. The microphone on the speaker stand gave a tiny squeal. Walker's skull tightened. Switch pressed his shoulder against Walker's calf before Walker had fully reacted. Not dramatic, not trained by any official program, just pressure, a living handrail. Walker breathed through it. Miriam noticed from across the aisle and gave him a small nod, as if marking a vital sign. People from Black Walnut Grove entered in uneasy clusters. Marlene Pike came with her coat buttoned wrong, eyes fixed on the floor. Jonah Rusk sat in the second row, knit cap crushed between both hands, his cough trapped behind clenched teeth. Earl from the diner came too, along with 2 retired railmen, a church treasurer, a widow whose well water had turned metallic after rain, and 3 people Walker did not know but recognized by posture. People who had spent too long deciding whether fear was a form of wisdom. Calder Voss was already there. He sat near the front in a charcoal coat, scarf folded with funerary elegance, a leather folder on his lap. He did not look angry after the fire. He looked prepared. That was worse. At 9 sharp, the council chair, a broad woman with silver hair and reading glasses hanging from a chain, tapped the gavel. The sound was small. Walker still felt it in his teeth. The chair introduced the agenda item as community concerns regarding potential environmental irregularities and historic property considerations in Black Walnut Grove. Edith whispered, "Irregularities." "A word invented to make crimes wear slippers," Vera whispered back. "Hush before they irregularity us out of the room." Walker was called first. That surprised him. He had expected Edith, Mercer, someone with papers and authority, not himself, not the outsider, not the man who had only stopped for coffee and found a dog beneath the snow. He walked to the microphone with Switch at his side. The room blurred at the edges. The microphone stood too close to his mouth. It smelled faintly of metal and other people's breath. He adjusted his hearing device, then regretted it when the room hissed louder. Switch sat beside his boot. Walker looked down at him. One amber eye, one clouded with healing. Ears alert, body still. Not asking him to be brave. Only staying. Walker looked at the council. "My name is Walker Crowley," he said. His voice sounded rough through the speakers. He winced at the amplified echo. Switch's shoulder touched his shin. "I'm not from Black Walnut Grove. I'm not an environmental expert. I'm not here because I wanted to be involved in this town's business." That earned a few murmurs. Honest admissions, unsettled rooms, trained for speeches. "I came through on a train," Walker continued. "I got off for coffee. I found a German shepherd chained inside an old freight car near the station. Starved. Injured. Left in the cold." Calder's face did not move. Walker's jaw tightened. "That dog belonged to Silas Bowman, the former stationmaster. I've learned since then that Mr. Bowman had concerns about night freight movement through Black Walnut Grove before he died. I've also learned that people in this town heard things, smelled things, saw things, and chose not to say them out loud." Several heads lowered. Walker stopped. This was the place where anger would have been easy. A soldier's anger. A simple blade. Accuse the cowards. Name the rot. Cut the room in half. Instead, he placed one hand on the edge of the podium until the wood steadied beneath his palm. "I understand that more than I want to," he said. The room grew quieter. There are people who get hurt in ways that change how they hear the world. A small sound can become something else. A door slamming, a microphone squealing, a train brake at the wrong pitch. You tell yourself you're fine because saying otherwise costs too much. You learn to avoid. You learn to keep moving. He looked toward the Black Walnut Grove residence. A town can do that too. Vera's eyes shone, though her face remained stern. Walker did not look at her long. You can hear a train after midnight and call it weather. You can taste metal in water and blame pipes. You can see a good man dismissed as confused because believing him would threaten the only money keeping heat in old houses. You can survive that way for a while. He paused. The microphone hummed. Switch leaned harder. But survival is not the same as being alive. No one spoke, not even Edith. Walker stepped back from the microphone. He had said enough. Edith came next with her document boxes and the expression of a woman prepared to perform surgery on ignorance without anesthesia. She did not tell a story. She built one. Car numbers, dates, rail easement records, lease transfers, Keystone Reclamation Services paperwork describing non-hazardous industrial material storage at the rear Halwick warehouse. Bowman's handwritten notes, photographs taken from public roads, the record of the maintenance camera outage on the night Bowman died. copies of the burned file, preserved now in plastic sleeves because Edith had nearly attacked Mercer when he suggested an ordinary folder. "These documents do not by themselves convict anyone," Edith said, looking directly at the counsel. "But they establish enough pattern to justify immediate formal review. If the counsel declines to act, that declination should also be recorded." One councilman shifted in his chair. Edith noticed and smiled thinly. Miriam spoke after her, calm and careful. She described Switch's injuries, then the preliminary samples she had taken from public roadside runoff and drainage near the old mine access. She repeated 3 times that her samples were not a legal determination. "But," she added, looking over her glasses, "when a retired veterinarian with no interest in drama finds discoloration, irritation patterns in animals, and residents reporting metallic well water near a former industrial site, the responsible next step is not denial. It is proper testing by the state." Mercer stood with his hat in both hands. He was not eloquent. That made what he said land harder. "I was the responding deputy when Mr. Bowman died," he said. "At the time, the scene did not present clear evidence of forced entry or violence. I accepted the medical conclusion and the railroad maintenance explanation about the camera outage." He swallowed. "I did not follow up on his complaints about late-night rail activity. I should have." The admission moved through the room like a door opening in a wall no one had admitted was there. "I am submitting my reports from the recovery of the dog, the opening of the station office, the hidden documents, and the attempted fire. I'm also requesting the council refer this to Pennsylvania DEP and the district attorney's office for review." Calder Voss rose before the chair called him. He did not rush. That was part of his power. "Madam Chair," he said, voice smooth enough to make oil seem honest, "Keystone Reclamation Services recognizes the emotional weight in the room today. We respect local history. We respect grief. We respect veterans." His eyes flicked toward Walker for half a second. "We also respect procedure. What has been presented here is a collection of assumptions, old papers, roadside photographs, and understandably heightened feelings following an unfortunate act of vandalism. Keystone has complied with all applicable storage and transportation regulations. Any suggestion otherwise is premature and potentially damaging to a community already economically fragile." He turned slightly, not to the council, but to the residents. "Let us be clear. If Black Walnut Grove becomes the center of an unfounded environmental panic, grants may disappear, partnerships may be suspended, property values already vulnerable may suffer further. Elderly residents on fixed incomes could bear the cost of speculation." There it was, not a threat, a weather report from a man who owned the storm. Marlene Pike lowered her face into her hands. Jonah Rusk began to cough. Calder softened his tone. "We are prepared to increase our support for historic preservation, including the station property, provided the process remains collaborative and fact-based." Vera stood. She carried something wrapped in a dish towel. At first, Walker thought it was food. Of course he did. With Vera, grief and pastry often traveled under the same cloth. She walked to the front table, unwrapped the bundle, and set down Silas Bowman's old stationmaster cap. The room changed. It was only a cap, dark wool, worn at the brim, brass rail insignia dulled with age. But it carried Silas more powerfully than a photograph might have. It was work, weather, habit, duty. It looked like something a man had reached for every morning because a town needed the platform checked whether anyone said thank you or not. Vera laid one hand beside it. "Silas Bowman sat in my diner 3 nights before he died," she said. "He was afraid, not for himself, for this town." Calder opened his mouth. Vera looked at him. He closed it. "I took Keystone money once," she said. A ripple moved through the Black Walnut Grove rows. Vera did not flinch. "A kitchen repair grant. came through a community fund. I didn't ask enough questions because my stove was dying, and pride does not cook breakfast. So I am not standing here pretending I was pure. I am standing here because I know what a bought silence feels like after you swallow it." The council chamber went utterly still. Vera touched the cap. "A town that lives by silence is not alive. It is only unburied." The words stayed in the air. Then Jonah Rusk stood. No one expected it, least of all Jonah. His knit cap twisted between his hands. His voice, when it came, was thin and rough from coughing. "I signed a condition form for Keystone's warehouse," he said. "I used to work Halewick. They wanted a local signature saying the rear storage building was suitable for industrial equipment. They paid me $200. Calder turned toward him slowly. "Mr. Rusk, I would caution—" Jonah looked at him with a tiredness stronger than fear. "No, I've been cautioned enough." The sentence struck harder than any shout. Jonah faced the council. "I saw sealed drums. I didn't know what was in them. I told myself I didn't know. That's not the same thing. Silas asked me about them later. I told him to stop digging." He breathed in with effort. Then he died. Marlene Pike stood next. She did not look brave. She looked frightened enough, to be honest, because fear had finally run out of places to hide. "My well water tastes like pennies after storms," she said. "I reported it once. I was told private testing would cost more than I had." An older railman stood. "I saw trucks on Briarcut Road past midnight." The church treasurer stood. "Keystone Foundation paid part of our roof repair." One by one, not as heroes, not as rebels, but as people tired of carrying small stones in their pockets, they spoke. The council chair removed her glasses. Calder sat down. For the first time, he looked less polished than pale. Walker watched from the side wall, one hand resting on Switch's harness. The dog had not moved. His gaze stayed on the room, not threatening, simply present. A witness in fur and scars. The vote took less time than the fear that had preceded it. The council passed a motion to submit the documentation to the Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection for urgent site review of the Halewick warehouse, the rail spur, and the abandoned mine access areas. A second motion directed the county solicitor to forward the records relating to freight movement, corporate filings, and the attempted destruction of documents to state investigators and, if interstate transport was implicated, appropriate federal authorities. No one said EPA would arrive like cavalry. No one promised immediate justice. That made it believable. That made it real. The door had opened. Calder could no longer close it with money shaped like kindness. After the meeting, Walker stepped outside before anyone could thank him. The microphone had left pain behind his right eye. His skin felt too tight. The cold air hit him like mercy. He sat on the courthouse steps, elbows on knees, and took the hearing device out for a moment. The world dulled. Wind became pressure. Voices behind the door softened into a low, human tide. Switch came with him. The dog placed his head on Walker's knee and exhaled. Walker rested a hand over the scarred fur behind his ear. Across the parking lot, people from Black Walnut Grove stood in small groups, not celebrating, not yet. Vera was handing apple cake to a council clerk who looked confused but grateful. Edith was correcting Mercer's spelling on a form. Jonah Rusk sat in his truck with both hands on the wheel, crying without trying to hide it. Walker took his phone from his pocket. The afternoon train schedule glowed on the screen. Departure, 3:42 p.m. He stared at it for a long time. A train was not escape if a man chose it honestly. But Walker knew honesty by now, at least its shape. He did not want the train today. He wanted the sound of it, the rhythm, the promise that leaving remained possible. That was not the same as leaving. He canceled the ticket. Just one. Not his whole old life, not his fear, not his need for motion. Just one train. Switch lifted his head as the phone screen went dark. Walker looked down at him. "I'll stay until the station has a new lock." Switch blinked slowly. "And until Vera stops feeding me like I'm a condemned man." The dog sighed. It sounded almost like agreement. Walker leaned back against the cold stone steps and watched the sunlight burn white across the snow. For the first time since he had arrived in Black Walnut Grove, the brightness did not look like a cover laid over rot. It looked like work waiting to begin. By spring, the official signs had gone up around Briarcut. They were not dramatic signs. Government signs rarely were. White metal, red lettering, black posts hammered into frozen ground that had softened into mud. Restricted area. Environmental testing in progress. No unauthorized entry. A row of orange mesh fencing cut across the old mine road where the trucks had once gone at night. It looked small against the hills. Too small for what it meant. Black Walnut Grove had not been saved in the way stories like to save places. No marching band returned to the platform. No great investor arrived with clean hands and a fat check. No miracle money poured over the roofs, fixing leaks, paying back debts, replacing the years people had spent swallowing fear with their coffee. Some residents lost lease payments tied to Keystone. Some blamed Vera. Some blamed Walker because outsiders made convenient targets. Some blamed Silas Bowman, which made Vera so furious she banned one man from the diner for life, and then, after 3 days, allowed him to return only if he ordered pie and apologized to the dead. The Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection opened its formal review first. Then, when freight records suggested interstate transport and disposal violations, federal investigators became involved. People in clean jackets and mud-stained boots came through town with clipboards, sample kits, maps, and words that sounded careful enough to die of old age. Remediation, liability, historical contamination, ongoing assessment. The cleanup would take years. That was the honest answer. Years. Walker liked honest answers even when they hurt. Especially then. A clean lie was just another kind of poison. Still, something had changed. Not in the roads. They were still cracked, not in the houses. Too many windows were still dark. Not even in the people, not all at once. Shame did not leave a town like smoke through an open door. It hid in curtains, in church pews, in men who looked down when Vera poured coffee. But Black Walnut Grove had stopped pretending the smell in the water was imagination. It had stopped calling night trains weather. It had stopped treating silence as a civic duty. That was not resurrection. It was breath. And breath, Walker had learned, was where the living began. The station work started with a lock. That was what Walker had promised. He would stay until the station had a new lock. He put it in on a bright morning with snow still tucked in the shadows under the platform. Mercer held the door steady. Vera supervised with unnecessary suspicion, and Edith stood behind them holding the manufacturer's instructions as if they were sacred scripture written by someone incompetent. "You are turning the screw too far," Edith said. Walker kept turning. "No, I'm not. The diagram indicates the diagram has never met this door." Mercer muttered, "Nobody has met this door. It was born crooked." Vera sipped coffee from a paper cup. "The door has character." "The door has structural resentment," Walker said. Switch sat on the platform watching them work, his head tilted slightly. His yellow and black coat had begun to shine again. The raw ring at his neck had faded beneath new fur, though the hair grew unevenly there, a faint ghost of the chain. His left eye had healed, but a pale cloud remained in the corner, a small winter that never quite melted. When Walker tested the lock and it clicked cleanly, everyone went quiet. It was ridiculous. A lock was a small thing, brass, steel, 2 keys on a ring. But this door had been broken, forced, ignored, used by people who counted on neglect. Now it closed properly, opened properly, answered to a key, held by someone who cared. Vera wiped at the corner of one eye and blamed the wind. Edith labeled the spare keys in 3 separate envelopes. Mercer pretended he had not been moved by hardware. Walker told himself he had fulfilled the promise. Then the front step cracked under his boot the next day. "Well," Vera said, standing beside him with her arms crossed, "you can't leave now. You'll be known as the man who installed a lock on a building that murders ankles." So he fixed the step, then the second step, because it looked jealous, then the platform railing, then one broken window frame, then a strip of roof flashing that clattered in the wind and made his right ear throb every time the gusts came hard out of the north. After that, leaving became less an action than a question he kept forgetting to answer. He still looked at train schedules. At first, every day, then every other day, then mostly on nights when sleep would not come and the sound of distant rails pulled at him like an old addiction. He would sit on the platform with Switch at his side, watching freight lights move far beyond town on the main line. The rhythm still soothed him. Steel on steel, joint, rhythm, joint, rhythm. But now the sound did not erase the town. It belonged to it. Weeks became months by way of small repairs and stubborn women. A preservation grant came through, not enough to restore the station, but enough to keep it from collapsing with pride. Edith called it modest but structurally meaningful. Vera called it money that doesn't smell funny. Mercer called it a paperwork miracle, then looked alarmed when Edith asked him to define miracle for the minutes. The station's waiting room became the first exhibit space, not a grand museum. Nothing polished enough to make Liz jealous. Just warm lamps, cleaned wood, old rail maps under glass, photographs clipped to wire, mining tools donated by families who had kept them in sheds long after the men who used them were gone. Bowman's stationmaster cap sat in a small case near the desk. Beside it, in Edith's exact lettering, a card read, "Silas Bowman, stationmaster." He listened when others were afraid to hear. Edith rejected the first version of the sign because Vera had used the phrase "sweet little museum" in conversation. "It is not sweet," Edith said. "It is not little in significance, and museum implies institutional scope we have not yet achieved." "What do you want people to call it?" Vera asked. "A public memory room?" Walker, sanding a window frame nearby, said, "That sounds like a place where ghosts check library cards." Edith looked at him over her glasses. "If they return materials late, they will be fined." Vera laughed so hard she nearly dropped a tray. Walker laughed too. This time the sound came easier. That became one of the ways he measured change, not in declarations, not in healing speeches, in whether laughter still felt foreign, leaving his own throat. Vera moved part of her weekend breakfast service into the station once the waiting room was safe. She set up a small counter near the old ticket window. Black coffee, apple cake, buttered toast, soup in thick bowls when mornings were cruel. She complained the whole time about the outlet placement, about tourists who photographed food before eating it, about men who called weak coffee smooth. But there was light in her complaints now. The old sharpness remained, but it had heat behind it, not ash. Edith curated. That was what she called it. Everyone else called it arranging things until they were afraid to touch them. She labeled every photograph, map, tool, and timetable with tidy cards. She corrected 3 visitors in one afternoon for calling the freight spur a sidetrack. She explained the distinction with such authority that by the end of the day, one of them apologized to the track. Mercer came by most mornings before his shift, sometimes in uniform, sometimes in flannel. He would stand near Bowman's cap and read the same sign as if it changed when no one watched. He had submitted supplemental reports. He had answered investigators' questions. He had not forgiven himself, but he had stopped confusing self-punishment with usefulness. Miriam checked Switch every other week. "He is gaining weight," she announced one Friday, hands on the dog's ribs. Not enough to satisfy Vera, but enough to satisfy science. Science has low standards, Vera said, sliding a small bowl toward Switch. Switch looked to Walker. Okay, Walker said. The dog ate. Not like the first day. Not as though food were a brief accident in a cruel universe. He still ate with focus, but no longer with panic. Sometimes he even left a small smear of gravy until Vera acted offended enough for him to lick the bowl clean. He learned the station, not like a guard defending a wound, like a dog inheriting a duty, and then slowly discovering it could also be a home. He lay beneath Vera's counter while she counted change. He rested his muzzle on Edith's knee when she fell asleep over accession forms, though Edith insisted she had merely entered a state of temporary archival contemplation. He nudged Mercer's hand when the deputy stood too long before Bowman's cap. And with Walker, Switch developed a language made of small warnings. A touch to the left hand when someone approached from Walker's bad side. A shoulder against his knee when the room grew too loud. A quiet look toward the platform when a train was coming before Walker felt the rails. The dog did not heal him. That was too simple. Switch gave him notice, and sometimes notice was enough to keep the past from ambushing him. Walker rented the room above Birchwood Diner in June. No ceremony, no speech. Vera handed him a key and told him not to track Mudd upstairs unless he planned to marry a mop. Walker put his duffel in the corner, hung his canvas jacket on the same hook 3 nights in a row, and found the act so intimate it nearly drove him back to the station platform. Staying was not dramatic. It was repetitive. That was what made it hard. Same stairs, same window, same woman yelling below about toast. Same dog sleeping with his back against the door. Same town visible each morning, whether Walker felt prepared to belong to it or not. On bad days, he still sat beside the tracks and let the trains pass through him. He still flinched when a hammer slipped. He still had to step outside when the coffee grinder screamed too long or when a visitor let the station door slam. There were afternoons when the bright sound of children laughing from a passing car made him ache for a life he had never chosen and did not know how to name. But there were good days, too. Days when the rails sang under snowmelt and did not sound like escape. Days when Vera placed coffee beside him without commentary, because even she understood silence could be a kindness when it did not demand burial. Days when Switch bounded, actually bounded, across the platform after a wind-blown paper cup, then stopped halfway as if embarrassed by joy. The first winter heritage train was scheduled for late December. Edith objected to the term heritage train because technically it was a seasonal excursion with interpretive components, but no one let her print that on the flyer. The morning it came, the station woke before dawn. Walker unlocked the front door while the sky was still deep blue. The new lock turned smoothly beneath his hand. Inside, he switched on the lamps one by one. Warm circles of gold appeared on old wood, on maps, on Bowman's cap, on the photographs of crowded platforms and coal trains and long-gone soldiers trying to come home. Vera arrived carrying 2 trays of apple cake and a pot of soup. "You're late," Walker said. "I am carrying civilization." Edith came behind her with a clipboard. "No one is to refer to this as quaint." "No one has arrived yet," Vera said. "I prefer prevention." Switch stepped out onto the platform. Snow had fallen overnight, clean and soft, covering the tracks in white except where the rails cut through, 2 dark lines leading out of town. He walked to the top step beneath the sign that read Black Walnut Grove Station, turned once, and sat. Not stiffly, not anxiously, proudly. The torn edge of his right ear caught the pale light. The cloud in his left eye shone silver. Around his neck, the leather collar Vera had found among her late husband's rail tools carried a small brass tag engraved with his name and 2 crossing tracks. Switch looked down the line. Walker stood in the doorway and watched him. Vera came beside him. Some folks say he's waiting for Silas." Walker did not answer right away. The dog's breath rose in a white plume. "Maybe," Walker said. Vera leaned against the doorframe. "I say he's waiting for the next thing." Behind them, Edith sniffed. Both interpretations are sentimental and historically unverifiable. Vera called back, "We're having a moment, Edith." "Then have an accurate one." Walker smiled. Far down the tracks, a horn sounded. The note came through cold air, long and low. Walker felt it first in the platform boards, then in his chest. Once that sound would have meant departure, a call to motion, a promise that he could climb aboard, sit by a window, and become no one again before the next town knew his name. Switch stood, not alarmed, ready. The winter excursion train came around the bend slowly, black engine nose breaking through silver morning. Snow lifted in soft clouds along the rails. The brakes sighed, not sharply, but with the tired dignity of old machinery asked to perform grace. Only a few passengers stepped down, an elderly couple in matching blue hats, a photographer with 2 cameras. 3 rail enthusiasts already arguing cheerfully about locomotive restoration. A woman traveling alone who stood for a long moment just looking at the station lights as if warmth itself had surprised her. Not a crowd, not a miracle. Enough. Vera opened the door wider. Coffee smell moved out into the cold. Edith straightened a label on a display no one had touched. Mercer, off duty, stood near the platform edge with his hands in his coat pockets, watching the passengers read the station sign. Switch remained on the step like a station dog from another century, solemn and welcoming, as if he had been appointed by snow, memory, and one dead man's stubbornness. A man with a camera crouched to photograph him. "Is he friendly?" the man asked. Walker looked at Switch. Switch looked at Walker. For the first time, the question did not feel dangerous. "He's working on it," Walker said. The photographer smiled. "Aren't we all?" Walker felt the answer settle somewhere quiet. Yes, they were. He placed his hand on Switch's head. The dog leaned into him, warm and solid, no longer the trembling creature chained inside a freight car, not entirely free of that darkness either. Nothing living escaped its past by pretending the chain had never existed. Freedom was not forgetting the metal. Freedom was hearing it fall and choosing every morning not to wear it again. The passengers entered the station. Their boots crossed the threshold where Switch had once placed his paw in the middle of the night. They looked at Bowman's cap, Edith's maps, Vera's counter, the photographs, the old rail lines leading through the hills. They asked what had happened here, and for once, Black Walnut Grove did not hide. Walker stood by the door as sunlight climbed the snow, and the train waited along the platform. The rails gleamed. The town breathed. Behind him, Vera complained that someone had put too much sugar in coffee. Edith corrected a visitor's pronunciation of Halwick. Mercer laughed under his breath. Switch sat against Walker's leg, steady as a promise made in plain daylight. Far off, another horn answered from somewhere beyond the ridge. Walker listened. The sound did not pull him away. It moved through him, then through the station, then out over the white fields and the fenced-off mine road, over the old wounds still being tested and named, over the town that had not been resurrected but had refused burial. For the first time in years, the rails did not sound like escape. They sounded like return. Sometimes healing does not arrive like thunder. Sometimes it comes quietly. Through a locked door finally opened, a wounded dog who refuses to give up, or one honest voice in a town that has been silent too long. Walker and Switch remind us that hope often begins with a small decision: to stay, to listen, and to do what is right, even when fear says to look away. May we all have the courage to hear the truth, the grace to begin again, and the faith to believe that even forgotten places can find light. If this story touched your heart, Share your thoughts in the comments. And if you believe in stories of loyalty, healing, and second chances, please subscribe and walk with us into the next one.